So please be aware that this is being recorded. So be wary of anything you might say. Adam, if I can ask you to just admit people in if they come into the lobby, just so I don't have to keep clicking on it. So thank you everybody for joining. Today we're going to be talking about Enterprise Mobility Suite and how that relates and what that means and what the actual product is, how it fits into the Microsoft stack as well as other things, and how that ultimately protects you, your users, devices, and applications in the cloud. So just a quick note of introduction on who I am and why I'm presenting this. So my name's Lorian Strand. I'm from Generation E. We're a very strong Microsoft partner. We focus on unified communications, cloud, specifically things like Office 365, Azure, SharePoint, EMS, Yammer, Skype for Business, and myself, I'm actually what's known as an Office 365 MVP, so I've been living and breathing cloud for about 6 years now. I actually used to run a company called Paradigm, which was acquired by Generation E in December. So if you look me up, that you might see my name attached to that. So we've been implementing Enterprise Mobility Suite for customers since day one. We've been using the technologies that exist within Enterprise Mobility Suite since they were in their infancy. For example, with one of the components, Microsoft Intune, used to formerly be known as Windows Intune. We actually did the first ever deployment of that in Australia about 5 years ago. And same as Office 365 and all those kind of things. So we live and breathe cloud, and one of the things we've been seeing is, as we're moving to a different type of organization and different type of working experience, we need to secure that, and that's where the Enterprise Mobility Suite comes into it, is to give us the productivity as well as the security. So I won't go through all the details of these of their stats, but while these are predominantly US-based statistics, the sentiment's the same around the world, and especially here in Australia, where we are a relatively technologically advanced workforce, and we also value our work flexibility. So it's very important to the Australian culture to be able to pick up the kids and or work from the pool or next to the pool, unless you've got a waterproof phone. And especially given the nature of our country and the size, a lot of our workforce is mobile, be they field salespeople, be they on-site inspectors or road crews, nurses, all those kind of things. So it's very important that while we're taking up cloud, we're being more mobile, that we make sure that we're secure and protected along the way. So what we effectively have is that's driving these changes. The reality is, in every organization, we've got users, device, applications, and data. That's not new, that's always been the case. But what we do have is three main categories of users: employees, business partners, and customers. Now, what we're seeing with a lot of cloud technologies is the ability for us to interact with our business partners and customers is becoming easier and more flexible and more dynamic. We're sharing more information. And so IT has historically been in control of all this. However, in the era of cloud, that's actually not so much the case, especially when you hear terms like shadow IT, and one of the products that comes to mind when you think of shadow IT is things like Dropbox, in that anybody can go up and sign for a Dropbox account, synchronize it to their office computer to take files home, and you have no idea that your corporate data is now sitting on someone's home PC. So the environment that our users are working in is rapidly expanding. Our users are using more applications, working from more devices, interacting and collaborating with a broader and broader network of individuals. And this is a great thing for business, education, government, all those kind of, it doesn't matter what industry, what sector, this is a fantastic thing. But it also brings risk. And the reality is that the corporate firewall that we have spent so much time and money investing in is really no longer the main protection point. We've come from an era where we have servers and PCs in the office, and that's effectively where all our data and users sit. But in this cloud world, that's actually not the case anymore. Our data is out there, our apps are out there, our users and our devices are all out there. So the issue that we have with that is that if any one of those points is compromised, this entire network, not just our corporate network, this entire network can be compromised. And that's a very, very dangerous thing to have in this era of cloud. You know, we used to have just simple viruses and ransomware and all those kind of things, but that's actually a lot more complex now, where people can actually be stealing our data and having it, you know, accessing in other countries. So how do we ensure that, you know, the data that's on a lost laptop is protected? How do we ensure that our user out in another country is not having their data, having their connection back to the cloud service that we're using, not actually being tapped and having all of their data being copied in the process? And that's one of the biggest things that I've seen, I guess, from my personal background, is that I guess in the past, and I've gone out there and installed many servers, many firewalls, and Cisco PIX firewalls and WatchGuards and all those kind of things over the years, and made networks extremely secure. But that's completely irrelevant now. And so in the past, all the corporate data we've had, or almost all of it, has been stored on premises, which means that, you know, we could use the perimeter, being the firewall, to manage access to the corporate data. We might publish desktops via Citrix, XenApp, or we might publish file shares and those kind of things. And typically this was pretty challenging to maintain. We required email gateways, we needed servers in the perimeter network, DMZs, lots of configuration, lots of scripts. However, the reality is that corporate data is actually being stored in the cloud, either because of the organization has made a decision to use things like SharePoint Online or CRM or Salesforce or even Dropbox or Box or something like that, or because employees themselves are actually either intentionally or unintentionally storing that data in the cloud. And again, I use Dropbox as the organization I'm probably going to kick the most, mostly not because their technology or their product is not good, but it's actually so good that it's just the kind of thing that you do. You want to share a file? Get Dropbox. That's just what you do. So what we actually end up is this security risk where corporate data might end up in the wrong hands. And the reality is that most enterprise mobility management vendors in the marketplace today don't really have a good solution for the whole stack. What they might have is a great mobile device management solution. They might have a good information security solution or an authentication solution, but there's no real one provider out there, solution out there that covers all those endpoints end to end. And that's where Enterprise Mobility Suite comes in. So some of the products that are part of the Enterprise Mobility Suite have been around for some time. Some of them have been seen have been in the background and not really known about, but have more come to light. Others have been rebranded, and others are brand new. So to give you some context, Azure Active Directory Premium, from all intents and purposes, a lot of organizations or IT professionals that haven't heard of it before think it's something relatively new. The reality is that Azure Active Directory has actually been powering Office 365 since day one. It's really only been in the last couple of years that it's come into its own product, as identity is more important now in the era of cloud. Microsoft Intune, as I said earlier, was originally known as Windows Intune, and it started its life as a SMB Windows-based PC management solution. However, that has evolved to be, while that's still an important component of what it does, the reality is Intune now is more of a mobile device management and application management solution. Azure Rights Management Premium I would say, again, being in the last couple of years, has come to light, but the reality is that rights management has actually been part of Windows Server for a number of years. And so now in this era of cloud, well, we can't rely on that that file on the server being protected. We've got to make sure that file is protected regardless of where it is. And Advanced Threat Analytics has come from a number of Microsoft acquisitions, and effectively what that is doing is looking at the patterns and the behaviors and what's around us and saying, okay, I can see that there's a threat of this particular type that might affect you, so I'm going to provide you with an alert that you can use to wrap a policy around your behavior to protect yourself from you being subject to that attack and those kind of things. So Apologies, I've been holding a cough for the last 3 weeks, so I'll try and mute where possible. So the reality is that we need to be able to access from multiple devices. We need to be productive, so we don't want to have it to a point where it's so secure that it's just not usable. We need to support lots of different operating systems, not just Windows, and we need to also make sure that we work with existing environments. And if we break that down, what that looks in real terms, organizations may have a BYOD policy, or they may provide mobile devices, but the reality is that our users are actually going home and adding their work email account to their personal device, or adding personal email or other content to their work device, just because the reality is people just don't want to switch devices. Myself personally, I have a Surface Pro 3 provided by my company that has my personal mail account on it as well, and it has a couple of personal files. I also have a Surface Pro 2 at home for personal use that also accesses work. And that's the reality, is people are accessing work from a variety of different devices. So we've got to make sure that we're securing that without hampering them in the process. And the big thing, Microsoft has always been Windows first and made that the first class citizen. But if you've been reading any of the press over the past couple of years, or seeing some of the app announcements, Microsoft has actually been making extremely large investments in making sure that its solutions work well on other platforms, not just Windows. So we're actually seeing a lot of functionality that exists on iOS and Android that doesn't actually exist on Windows. And also the last part of that, about preserving existing investments. When not everybody's going to throw in their hundreds of thousands of dollars and they've spent on IT over the years and say, right, we're going completely cloud. While that's a fantastic endpoint, it may not necessarily be the right endpoint for every organization. It may not necessarily be something you want to do overnight. And the reality is, so this is a journey. This is something that we go to over time. And for a lot of organizations, we start off with just moving mailboxes because that's the easiest workload. And then we start moving file servers, and we start using business processes in the cloud and those kind of things. So we've got to make sure that we're not just going cloud first and that's it, but we're actually making sure that we ensure the existing systems work and that we're protecting and controlling those as well. So if you think about identity, realistically, geez, I'm saying realistically a lot. We have a lot of identities all over the place. Generally, on a day-to-day basis, we have our Active Directory account. But if you think about it, if you're using something like Salesforce, that's another identity. If you're using SAP or Sugar CRM or Dropbox or DocuSign or any other application that exists out on the web or the internet or the cloud, it's got its own identity. So what that means is, from a user perspective, we've got multiple different identities, multiple passwords. But from an IT perspective, you've now got different elements that you don't have control over. So how do we make sure that we control and protect all of those identities so that we can ensure that if, let's say, our lead salesperson resigns tomorrow, sure, we can disable their Active Directory account, that's fine. But if that Active Directory is not connected to, if Active Directory is not connected to Dropbox, where you have all your contract signing, that unless you've remembered to go in and disable that account as well, they've still got access to all those signed contracts. If your CRM is not necessarily tied to your Active Directory, so using Salesforce, Sugar CRM, or any number of other ones out there that again has its own identity, again, we've got to go around and spend half an hour, an hour going into all these different systems disabling that user account. So this is quite a risk that we've really got to address. And again, that's where Enterprise Mobility Suite comes into that. It's safe to say that most organizations have an Active Directory environment and that they use that as their primary source of truth of identities. So how do we make sure that that's extended to the cloud? And that's where Azure Active Directory comes into it. Azure Active Directory is an extension of your on-premises Active Directory. That is, if you're already on Office 365, you've already got it and you're using it for that. But if you're using some of the other services, how do we connect those? And that's, again, where Azure Active Directory comes into it. So instead of having to put a identity management component onto our on-premises Active Directory infrastructure, we can put that into the cloud and use Azure Active Directory to connect all these different services together and make sure that we have a seamless user experience from a single sign-on or same sign-on as well as being able to self-service applications, password resets, and those kind of things. So a really simple solution that Azure Active Directory provides out of the box is self-service password reset. Now, you may already have that through some third-party application or identity management solution on premises. But what happens if I'm I'm in another country, I'm in a different time zone, or it's just the weekend, and I've forgotten my password or my password's expired? Now, usually I would have to try to log into a corporate system or call service desk and have them reset my password. Whereas what we can do already with Azure Active Directory, as I said, very simple solution, is we can use that self-service password reset where we determine a number of different authentication mechanisms to verify that it is me resetting my password. And when that's done, that actually writes back to our on-premises Active Directory so that when I log into my domain-joined Windows PC on Monday, it's actually using that password that I set over the weekend. And that's a really quick and simple win that we already get out of this. It cuts down help desk time, it improves the user experience, and that doesn't just require Office 365. That self-service password reset can be made available to any Azure Active Directory connected application. If we're using things like Windows 10 and the Edge browser, we actually can use that same synchronized identity to flow through to all those other applications that are Azure AD aware, and I'll talk more about that shortly. Sorry, I didn't make it to the mute button in time. One of the important things of the Azure component of Enterprise Mobility Suite is the machine learning and security reports that it provides in the background. So if I'm sitting here in our Richmond office in Generation E, and if in 3 minutes I log into Kuala Lumpur, it might say, that's a bit of a strange behavior, Lauren. I'm not sure I'm going to actually permit you, depending on the rule, or simply do say, provide a log and an audit notification to say, Lauren logged in another country while he was already logged in Melbourne. That's strange behavior. So we can define policies on that. We can also define policies that I'll speak more about around application security, so something called conditional access, which is a topic that I absolutely love, and I'll speak very enthusiastically about it shortly, and multi-factor authentication. So, over the years we've had solutions like RSA and their tokens, but that's meant that you've had to carry a physical token around with you, or in recent years you've been able to use a mobile app on your phone to emulate the RSA token. Whereas again, we've got that out of the box with Office 365. We've also got something called Cloud App Discovery, which effectively what that does, and I don't have any more slides on it, but that effectively scans the user's PC, and yes, it's Windows driven, but what it does is provides you with a seamless report to say, hey, this user is using this solution over here, and that's Azure Active Directory aware, so hey, you can manage that experience, you can control that sign-in to that application. So it just sits in the background. It's a very small agent that really doesn't interfere with the user. It's not actually even visible to them. And you get a weekly report to say, hey, these applications were used that you don't know about. So it's a great way to keep tabs on it. And yes, while we have firewalls that allow us to look at web traffic, what this is actually doing is connecting to the Azure Active Directory database and saying, I can manage that application for you, as opposed to simply saying the user went to Salesforce. It can say, I can sign in, I can manage that sign in for you. And as I was saying before, with the threat detection, it starts to look at the user behavior. It starts to look at, it starts to use the components of machine learning where it looks at an attack timeline and says, right, this device did this strange, this user did this strange, this happened over here. I'm starting to detect that an attack may be imminent, and depending on the policy, we can choose to lock things down or simply provide notifications. I got to the mute button for that one. So this is connecting to our, as I was saying, the Advanced Threat Analytics connects to the devices, it connects to Active Directory, it looks for patterns, on other organizations as well, and says, right, an organization of these cloud applications experience this over here, so this actually might be relevant to you. What do you want to do about it, Lauren? One of the things that's been made available recently, and when I say recently, I think in the last 9 months or so, is Azure Active Directory B2B and B2C. If we think about when we're working with business partners or customers, when we want to share information with them, Great, we've got things like OneDrive and SharePoint where we can invite people into it, where we can do things like Skype Federation. But what if I want to work with an entire organization or just trust that organization because we're working on a joint venture or they're a business partner that we're doing product development on? So what we can actually do is trust the entire organization, but then within that, that doesn't necessarily mean they've got access to everything. It's simply saying, I trust this organization to access my resources, so they don't need to create another identity to sign in. This works really well within trusting between Office 365 based customers or Azure Active Directory based customers, but also beyond that. So effectively, anybody with Active Directory, we can trust them. It's effectively federation trusts in the cloud, powered by Azure Active Directory. So it makes it much, much simpler to provide customers, for example, access to a web application you're providing them or to shared resources that you're working with them on, instead of them requiring a sign-up. Where Azure Active Directory B2C comes into that is if, for example, you provide an application to customers that requires them to have a login and password. So an example I would use would be my accounting firm. I have to have a separate username and password to access my client portal. I have to do the same for my kids' kinder. There are so many things as an individual I need to access. But the reality of that is I already have lots of consumer-based identities out there, such as I've got a Microsoft account, I've got a LinkedIn account, I've got a Facebook account. So what B2C allows you to do is to say you can authenticate using an existing account somewhere else. So I will trust Facebook as an authentication provider. Now, you don't necessarily have to do that because Facebook can potentially get hacked, but you can say, I trust Live ID or I trust Google accounts. And this is a great thing when you're dealing with end users or end customers, as opposed to an organizational level integration. And so where this also then extends to, as I was mentioning before, about controlling the files. If you think about it, we historically would say if you want to access files, you need to VPN into the office, or you need to use remote desktop services or Citrix, whatever it might be, to access the content that lives here. When that content lives in OneDrive or Dropbox and those kind of things, how do we protect that? So this is where this comes into play, and we've got things like rights management, we've got application management to ensure that the content that I deem as secure content or corporate content can only be interacted with in certain ways, and I'll talk through that very shortly. And that's effectively what this is. If we look at this particular screenshot here, is purposely drawn to look like an iPad. In just one email alone, we've got the identity being the recipient and the sender, we've got the device being the iOS-based device, we've got the application being the mail client or Outlook, and then we've got the data being the content within it, such as the actual body of the email or a file that's attached to it. So we've actually got to have a solution that controls all of that and secures all of that. So a mobile device management solution won't take you to that level because it will control the devices and make sure they're secure and patched. It won't make sure that the user who's using that device can or can't access other web-based solutions. It won't make sure that the data that's being sent through that device is protected. And that's again where Enterprise Mobility Suite really comes into all of that to protect it. As I said, conditional access, this is one of the things that excites me the most. This is effectively your new firewall, if you will, or your new firewall in the cloud. So if you think about historically, we have had to patch PCs and make sure they've got all the latest hot fixes and cumulative updates and everything else installed on them. But we've got no way of really stopping them from accessing things. Whereas conditional access says, hey, you're connecting to these cloud services, and I'm going to make sure that your device is secure and compliant before I let you connect to it. So that way, the average user can go home and sign into their iPad, then it's their personal iPad, and before it connects, it will allow you to add the account to the device, but the only email that account will receive is the first one saying, hi, welcome to our service. Before I can give you access to anything, you've got to do these three things. One is enroll your device, and one is make sure that it is that we're allowing that type of device as opposed to that specific device, and then make sure that that device is compliant. So we can create policies to say, right, if you're accessing Exchange online, I want to make sure that your device is secure so that you're not using a jailbroken device. So what this is effectively doing is building on top of where we've had things like Exchange ActiveSync has given us a certain amount of policies and control. This takes it a big step further, where it's very user driven, it's very simple, and it takes the user through a process to make sure that they are fully compliant before they can actually access that content. As I said, one of my favorite features, because I'm giving the users everything they need. I'm giving them access to OneDrive and Outlook and all this content, and I don't care about what device they use, because I know that through conditional access, I'm actually making sure it's secure. Now, in this particular slide, what I've said here is that we can use either mobile devices or Windows 10. Now, I'll talk more about Windows 10 shortly, because Windows 10, the reality is how it gets treated by some of these solutions is actually as a mobile device, despite the fact that it is actually, might be, as I'm running it now on a Surface Pro 3, I can still actually use mobile device management and mobile application management, as well as desktop management. But as I was saying earlier, that Microsoft has made great efforts to ensure that other market-leading devices, such as iOS and Android, are first-class citizens as well. So a perfect example of how we actually did this in my Paradigm days was we simply turned it on for the entire organization, and all of a sudden, nobody could access their email. But they got an email in there that said, right, do these 3 things, and away you go. And it was a fantastic experience because I knew that I had provided all our staff with Surface Pro 3s and Windows phones, but I also knew that some of the guys were using iPads and Android devices. So if I didn't provide that device, how do I know that it's secure? This was the way that I did it. And that's where conditional access with Enterprise Mobility Suite takes it a step further as well, because we can actually define things by IP range, by the device state, and by group membership as well. So I can actually say that, sorry, I would normally allow you access, but you're actually outside of this IP range. So even though this is a cloud service, I'm not letting you in because you're not on a corporate IP range. We can actually do this similar with multi-factor authentication. It's not tied to conditional access, but we can actually say the moment you step outside of the office, I'm going to prompt you for a second form of authentication. Or the moment you use a non-registered device, you will get another form of authentication. So a real-world example is I'm actually a virtual Microsoft employee. I have a dedicated notebook that's joined to the Microsoft Azure Active Directory. But as you can imagine, I don't sit in the Microsoft office all day, every day. I sit in the Generation E office or my home office or out with clients or even other countries. So I would say that 99% of the time, I need to have my phone nearby because I'm outside of the corporate network. I'm still on a corporate registered and controlled device because of Intune and Azure Active Directory, but I'm outside of the corporate network. So when I access certain resources, it says, hey, please authenticate again. So one of the things that I guess a term that hasn't really been that prevalent is mobile application management. So when we think about mobiles, we think about mobile device management, and that really comes from an era of I provide you the device, I want to make sure that it's secure, or I have a BYOD program, therefore I want to make sure that everything on there is secure. So what mobile application management says is, you know what, I actually don't really care if it's a personal device or a work device. I care about how that device interacts with me and my content. So if we'll have a look at this particular device here, where you can see on the screen we've got corporate apps like Excel and PowerPoint and Skype and OneDrive. We've also got FreshPaint and Facebook and Netflix and Kindle. And these aren't corporate applications. So we've got managed applications, which says, yes, this is a personal device. You can install these applications and I will control what happens in these applications only, as opposed to what happens in these personal applications. And conversely, it can be a corporate-owned device, and it's flipped the other way, which is, again, we control the apps that are on there, but yeah, you've installed the Kindle reader because you travel a lot and you want to use your work device to read books when you're on the plane or whatever it might be. And that's where mobile application management comes into it, and that's the Intune component, is we're caring less about the specific device, and we're caring more about the applications that that device may be accessing. What this allows us to do is to then control the content that's on those devices. Excuse me. And this is where, say for example, I've received an email attachment. What I can do with that email attachment is I can copy it into Excel, but I can't paste it into a personal application. So let's say I've got a personal iPad that I've connected into the Generation E environment. What that allows me to do is, great, I install these applications. Intune is aware of my iPad because even though it's personal, I've registered it just so I can access this content. Now, if I want to save that file that's come from Outlook into my iCloud, it will say no. The option actually to paste or save simply won't exist. It's just disabled. If I want to paste content out of email into Word, it will say yes, that's fine because I trust the application. But again, if I want to save that Word document that I've pasted this content into my personal OneDrive or iCloud or Dropbox or whatever it might be, it will say no, because I trust the application, but I don't trust the location of where you're saving the content to. However, if I then try and save it to OneDrive for Business, it will say, yep, I know that location, I trust it, you can save that content. And that's a very important thing that we need to be thinking about, is that this is the thing that actually gives our users flexibility and the ability to be more productive. So we're not governing how they use their device and what applications they are necessarily using. We're actually saying, hey, do whatever you want, bring whatever devices, but I'm going to control the content and how the applications work that are within my remit. One of the things that I use quite a lot is Azure Rights Management. As I was saying before, rights management has actually been around Windows Server for quite some time. However, what Azure Rights Management allows you to do is to protect the files as opposed to necessarily the location or the device. So I can actually have a file sitting on my network file share that I encrypt using Azure Rights Management. I protect it. And I can actually send that as an attachment to anybody I like. I can stick it on a USB stick and leave it on a train. I actually don't care because it's protected through the cloud. So the location of that file is irrelevant because it's a protected file. The great thing I can do with this, though, is I can also track it. So if, let's say I do leave it on a USB stick and on a train and someone picks it up and they plug it in, I will get an alert. I will be notified that somebody tried to access that file. Because with rights management, the contents are bound to the identity. So this means, and again, a real-world example, I get an email as a virtual Microsoft employee about the Office 365 roadmap. Now, I'm covered by at least 3 different non-disclosure agreements from Microsoft. So I'm very careful about that content because that gives me a lot of information that's internal only that I should not be sharing with public. But I do want to share it with certain members of the Generation E team who work with Office 365 myself very closely. So what I do with that is I actually take the contents of that particular email and I stick it into Generation E email and I apply a rights management policy. And that rights management policy dictates that you cannot save, print, copy, or reply or do anything with this. The best hope you've got is to take a photo of your screen. And the reality is we can't really prevent that at any level ever. Because even if you want to prevent phone application, the camera application on a mobile phone, someone can still have, go down to JB Hi-Fi and buy a $100 camera. I can't stop that. However, one of the recent features of this is that I can, we did a test the other day. We used the snipping tool within Windows. The moment we actually loaded the snipping tool, that entire content went gray on our screen. And that's the intelligence of the content through Azure Rights Management. It's saying, great, you can have this, but the moment you do something that I don't trust, I'm going to stop access to it. With rights management as well, we can time bomb files. So I can actually send a file to somebody and I can revoke access at any time, or I can expire it after 30 days. So if you think about where we would have on the bottom of proposals or contracts, things like commercial in confidence, but the reality is you had no way to ever enforce that. The best hope you had is to find out that that had been breached and then to sue the person. And that really wasn't exactly a simple or cheap exercise. Whereas with Azure Rights Management, we can have that commercial in confidence. I can send it to that person and know that only that person accesses it. And at the moment they've given it to somebody else and they try and access it, I'll know who tried to access it, when and where. And if, for example, we've had a contract breach with a business partner, I can revoke access to all of the work product that we've shared with them, or IP, or anything, so that, great, they've got all these files on their file server, but they're just blobs of files. They can't open them because I prevented those identities from accessing our content. Now, this Azure Rights Management can be done at a policy level, so we can apply it to SharePoint libraries, we can apply it to file shares, we can also just have the plugin in Outlook as well as within Windows itself, so I can, at a whim or at a moment's notice, just right-click a file and share it with Rights Management and protect it straight away, or I can just protect it on my machine. Sorry about that. As I was saying before, Enterprise Mobility Suite has been built for a mobile and cloud world, not just a Microsoft world. So we see a lot of the features actually are better on iOS and Android from a mobile perspective, because it doesn't take a genius to see that the Windows mobile market share is well below 5%. However, on the desktop experience, we're actually on par as well. And again, that's where I was saying that Windows 10 really brings that into play, and I'll talk more about that. Being on par, because it is treated as a mobile device even though it's desktop. With Azure Active Directory, we can provide single sign-on to thousands of applications, and it doesn't actually have to just be those applications. We can actually provide single sign-on and controlled access for cloud users to on-premises applications and line of business applications, for things such as there's an application called Azure Active Directory Application Proxy. So I can have a whole bunch of field users out there using cloud services accessing on-premises applications. They don't have to authenticate to our on-prem AD. They can just be using their Edge browser or iOS device. Now, Shane, you've asked a good question there about Mac OS. Mac OS has been treated as a second-class citizen, more so by the Windows, or sorry, the I guess the cloud infrastructure. So Office is easily a first-class citizen on Mac OS. Intune has only just recently provided Mac OS support. Things like rights management exist within Office. The Azure Active Directory, things like the single sign-in, that's more of a Windows feature, and iOS and Android feature as opposed to Mac OS. So Mac is, I guess, similar in terms of Windows Phone because of market share. Very popular operating system, but from an actual usability perspective, it's just not as supported, but it's certainly catching up a lot. And as I said, yeah, under under Microsoft Intune, you can manage iOS devices now. Android. Too many words. You can manage Mac OS devices, but it doesn't give you as much as a Windows device yet. There was a question about Windows Phone from Peter. I completely agree with you, and that's a topic I'll happily take with you offline, because you can take my Windows phone from me from my cold dead hands. However, that being said, Windows 10 Mobile is a lot closer to Windows on the desktop. So if you develop an application for Windows generally, so using the Universal app, Universal Windows apps, it can run on both Windows Phone as well as Windows Desktop, and you can control it through the same mechanisms. So if I have a look at how we actually stack these up, as I said earlier, there's not really any one vendor that has all these excuse me, all these solutions covered under one product. What we do have is amazing products out there that can do certain jobs and have been out there, such as AirWatch and Mobile Iron and Good from a mobile device management perspective. We've had Altiris and Landesk, and from a desktop perspective. What we haven't really seen from a rights management perspective, there are some solutions out there, but they're very small and bespoke, because that hasn't really been a huge thing outside of certain sectors. From an identity management perspective, we have had Okta and Ping and Centrify to cover those things, but we haven't had one vendor provide all of those solutions under one product, and that's effectively where Enterprise Mobility Suite comes into it. Now, the prices listed here are actually US pricing, so please don't take those as verbatim and beat your Microsoft account rep over the head or your licensing partner over the head with them. However, it is representative of the ratio of pricing. So if you also think about it from an IT perspective, you would need to have multiple vendor contracts, multiple relationships, multiple expertise within your team to manage all of these different applications, and they don't necessarily always work well together. And again, that's where Enterprise Mobility Suite is a single product or a single license SKU that gives you all of those capabilities. One of the things that we obviously, I don't have to go much into it in detail, but because it's cloud, it's always up to date. There's always new features being added. And one of the big things that Microsoft has made great strides on is to make sure that it works with what you've got. Because as much as we race to cloud and say cloud is the future, everything must be in the cloud, we're not moving there ridiculously fast. Some organizations faster than others, some are born in the cloud, but the reality is we have a lot of infrastructure and a lot of applications, devices, and users that aren't moving that quickly. So, excuse me. If you've got Office 365, and I note on the survey when you registered that some people had already said they're using Office 365, there are actually some elements of EMS in Office 365 already, but these only work with Office 365, whereas EMS goes beyond that. So it's important to note that as organizations take up Office 365 or expand its use and become more cloud aware, that naturally users are going to be more mobile, more cloud-based, and we need to secure, protect, and control beyond just Office 365. Because, yeah, you may not choose to use Dynamics CRM as your CRM, even though you're using Office 365. You may choose to use Salesforce or Sugar CRM or something else. And as I said, so that's where EMS sits on top of that. So within Office 365, we do have basic identity management from Azure Active Directory, and we do have single sign-on, and we do have multi-factor authentication, but only for Office 365. Similar with the mobile device management, we've got things like Exchange Active Sync, and added about a year ago was mobile device management within Office 365 that's actually powered by Intune. But again, that's only for Office 365 components, and it's also very rudimentary compared against Intune on its own. And from a rights management perspective, we've also got rights management built into Office 365, but it only works with that. So if you are moving to SharePoint, moving to OneDrive, but you still have files on premises, that's where the Enterprise Mobility Suite adds that rights management component to that side of it, not just Office 365. If you're looking at rolling out Windows 10 or already have started, EMS really adds onto that and makes it an amazing experience. So, excuse me. What we have is, if we look at the traditional IT world of user starts in an organization, gets a device, it's imaged, applications are preloaded, certain SOE. What we can do, and doesn't mean you have to do it, or doesn't mean you have to do all of it, is with the EMS world. So a perfect example would be how I use my computer. Generation E still has an Active Directory, they still have System Center Configuration Manager, they still have file shares. I live in a cloud world, so when I re-imaged my device over the summer holidays, because hey, that's what I do for fun. No, I did not have to bring it into the office to connect it to our corporate resources. When I booted up my machine, it says, hey, is this device corporate owned or personal owned? I selected corporate owned. It then says, do you want to join Azure Active Directory or Active Directory? I selected Azure Active Directory, put in my Office 365 credentials. It brought up the Generation E logo, it brought up some text and policy information, and then it joined the device to our Azure Active Directory. It enrolled it into Intune, and straight away I had a managed device, and straight away applications started getting pushed out to my machine. So if you think about, as I was saying before, the old world user experience of here's a pre-imaged device, we can now do away with having to create a plethora of SOEs and supporting different hardware, because the operating system will take care of the hardware and the drivers. And as soon as the user is as soon as the user puts in their credentials, that's the point that we can now control the device. And depending on the architecture, just because these services are provided by the cloud doesn't mean the content has to come from the cloud. So if a new person starts on Monday, take them through the process. It doesn't mean they're bringing Office Pro Plus down from the cloud. It doesn't mean they're bringing their line of business applications or wireless LAN policies down from the cloud. Some of that might actually already be on site using BITS, Background Intelligent Transfer System, where that information is on premises. So the instruction is being given by the cloud, but the content is coming locally. So, as I was saying, with Windows 10, it is being treated as a mobile device as well as a desktop device. So that's where both Azure Active Directory, rights management, and Intune just are actually built into the operating system as a core. So you don't have to worry about adding additional add-ins and all those kind of things. So I can sign into all the apps that we use just using the Edge browser, and it already knows that it's an Azure Active Directory application, because when I'm prompted for or when I go to that particular page, the first time when I go to sign in, it will actually say, oh, you want to sign in with lauren.strand@generation-e.com.au, because that's connected to Windows and I trust that. And that's all I have to do, and then the next time it will just simply take me straight in. So bringing this all together, what does this look like from a licensing construct? There is something called the Enterprise Cloud Suite, which brings together Office 365 E3, the Enterprise Mobility Suite, and Windows software assurance. So you can actually package it all up, and it's actually quite an affordable way to license all the components. So if you've got Office 365 already and you want to take on Enterprise Mobility Suite, that's something your license provider can help with, where they can actually take you to that step up. Or you can keep them separate, whatever works for you, and you can still have a mix and match. So there have been some questions throughout, but I open the floor now to if there are any questions. But one thing I will say from a next steps perspective, depending on your licensing construct and amount of users, you can potentially use Microsoft Fast Track Funds as the program to assist with the deployment. So effectively, Microsoft pays us a set amount of money per user to help customers with deployments. So that eases the burden of taking on that solution. Or alternatively, if you're not eligible for it, depending what it is, we've got some organizations that start off with just rights management, or start off with just Azure Active Directory, or just Intune, and we integrate that with System Center Configuration Manager. Or there's a whole bunch of different varieties of ways that you can take it up. It doesn't mean you have to be committed all into it. So my contact details are there, my email address and direct phone number. Yeah, hope if you've got any questions, please IM them through, and I'll answer them as quickly as possible. Shane, you've asked for not-for-profit pricing for Intune, EMS, Azure. Azure on its own, there isn't any not-for-profit pricing yet. That is starting to flow through from the $1 billion commitment Microsoft made. But for EMS, there is discounted pricing available. So drop me an email, I can help you out with that, or speak to your licensing provider. John, do you foresee a time when Windows Mobile can be managed using group policy and other AD functions as well, as remote assistance to support mobile users the same way PC can? The answer to that is yes. I do see that. I have seen several years ago, I was at Microsoft's Worldwide Partner Conference, and I saw demonstrations for Mobile Iron and AirWatch, and saw how they could control mobile devices, and that actually is coming. It's whether it's going to be 6 months or 12 months for Windows Mobile specifically. I can't say for sure, but yes, that is coming. Several people have asked if we can get a copy of the presentation and the slides. The answer to that is yes. I will be posting the webinar up and sending a copy of the recording to everybody. And if you want the slides, feel free to drop me an email, because it's a very large slide deck, so it's not the kind of thing that I would send over email, as it's 41 megabytes for all those pretty animations. So drop me an email, and yeah, I can send it through to you in another way. Any other questions? Feel free to IM them through. Seems to be silence on the question front. So if you do have any more questions, feel free to send me an email. If you're using Skype for Business, we have open federation, so feel free to add me on Skype and ping me that way. I'm always happy to help. So thank you for the feedback. I'm glad this has been useful. If there's anything that you do want to know deeper or with more information, feel free to ping me and happy to take you through it. Also happy to do more deep dive demonstrations as well. If you've got any feedback on things you'd like to see more, if you do want to see another kind of session like this with a bit more information on one of those specific elements of it, feel free to drop me a note, and I'm always open to feedback. All right, thanks everyone. Have a fantastic rest of the day.